They are too small for the eye to see, but creating a global medical emergency. The superbugs that have become resistant to modern medicine, turning common treatable infections into killers. But is it too late to turn the tide? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abougada. It heralded a breakthrough in the fight against infection, the advent of antibiotics some 70 years ago, used in the treatment of countless common diseases, from typhoid to tuberculosis and malaria to pneumonia. Over the years, the bugs and bacteria have been fighting back to the point that they've become resistant to treatment. The World Health Organization says so-called superbugs are now posing what it calls an increasingly serious threat to global public health. Well, superbugs are estimated to contribute to up to 700,000 deaths a year. A report commissioned by the British Prime Minister David Cameron has warned that a failure to treat drug-resistant infections could see that figure soar to 10 million by 2050. It estimates the cost to the global economy by that time to be around $100 trillion. To put this in context, cancer currently accounts for around 8 million deaths a year, while annual global GDP stands at around $77 trillion. To make matters worse, no new antibiotics have been discovered in the past 30 years. Very few antibacterial drugs are in development to tackle drug resistance. So the race is on for scientists to come up with better medicines. To do that, they need to understand how bacteria actually evolve. Al Jazeera's Nadim Baba has been to a research centre in southern England.
You might not realise it, but you're looking at a medical revolution. When it comes to diseases, researchers here at the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute aren't just interested in what strain of a bacterium is the cause. They want to know the entire DNA of the bug. They call it whole genome sequencing, and these machines are at the heart of it.
Well, they may look like high-tech refrigerators, but these sequencers are at the heart of the science that researchers hope will one day allow them to track diseases around the world in real time.
Julian Parkhill heads a team that's developing ways of tracking a whole range of so-called superbugs which have become resistant to antibiotics. He likens the approach to creating a family tree of the bacteria.
So if I take the bacterium from you and the bacterium from me, and I take the whole genome sequence of both of them, I can say how closely related they are, how long ago they shared a common ancestor, and therefore how likely it is that you gave that bacterium to me or I gave it to you.
In another part of the Sanger Institute, they're working on a mass killer, malaria.
They send us samples here which have been extracted, which have been taken from a patient's arm, blood that's been taken from infected blood.
Researchers are busy analysing how the plasmodium parasites that cause the illness in humans are becoming resistant to anti-malarial drugs. But they're also trying to discover how the mosquitoes which spread the parasites in the first place become resistant to insecticides.
To control malaria, you want to do two things. You want to get rid of the parasites in people who've got parasites, particularly if they're ill, and you want to stop the mosquitoes transmitting malaria. And there are various strategies for doing that, such as getting people to sleep under insecticide-treated bed nets. We have to be concerned both about whether we've got effective treatment for parasites and whether the bugs are resistant to that. Equally, we have to have effective insecticides to get rid of the mosquitoes, and we are worried about insecticide resistance in the mosquitoes.
Malaria affects hundreds of millions of people every year, and it's a major cause of death among children in parts of Africa. Experts are worried that resistance to the frontline treatment artemisinin, which has been increasing in Southeast Asia, could be repeated in sub-Saharan nations.
The death rate from malaria is very high already. Despite the availability of effective drugs, it's already high. So if the drugs are not working and there is no replacement drug handy, then it's going to be a disaster.
But that disaster need never happen as long as the world can share the lessons from the genetic mutations that they're finding out about here. Nadim Baba, Al Jazeera in southern England.
Let's bring in our guests. In Geneva, we have Keiji Fukuda. He's an Assistant Director General of Health Security at the World Health Organization. Joining us from New Delhi is Shelly Batra. She's a doctor. She also founded Operation Asha. That's a non-government organization providing treatment for tuberculosis. Completing our panel in London is Ghada Zubian. She's a program manager of infections at the Medical Research Council. Thanks very much for being with us on Inside Story. If I can start off with Keiji in Geneva, a report by the WHO, your organization, reveals that the threat of antibiotic resistance is serious. You say it's no longer a prediction for the future. It's happening right now in every region of the world. It has the potential to affect anyone of any age in any country. Sounds pretty serious, but what is the WHO doing to stop or slow the spread?
Well, I think that all of those statements are true. We are seeing this problem now. And some of the main things that we've been doing in the past couple of years has been focusing on raising awareness at all levels of society, but particularly trying to get the attention of different sectors and policymakers, and then working on developing what's been termed the Global Action Plan for Antimicrobial Resistance, really to get countries on board, to get sectors on board. And so now that that has been accomplished, we'll be shifting our attention towards implementing the actions in those action plans.
And when you speak of getting governments on board, do you feel like this is a top priority for the governments that you are talking to?
I think this is one of the global health problems which has risen more quickly than probably virtually any other problem that I've seen at this level. And I think the reason for that is that the utter seriousness of the issue, the fact that it does have the potential to affect virtually everybody, and the fact that we are seeing it in developing countries as well as developed countries, and we're seeing it across the board, and the fact that it is leading to deaths, to unnecessary hospitalizations, and costing at a minimum several hundreds of millions of dollars now, but potentially much, much more in the future. All of these things are getting the attention of governments. And so, yes, I would say that this is really resonating with governments now.
Ghada, would you agree with that statement, that it is resonating with governments? They are doing all that they can to combat this? And also, do we have enough information at this point of how many people actually get sick and die from drug-resistant infections?
I have to agree that it is a major problem, that the United Kingdom is quite privileged because the Prime Minister is aware and acknowledged this problem. But what we are doing at the Medical Research Council, and as part of the Research Council initiative that we launched last year, is we know that there are a lot of unanswered questions at the basic level to understand what antimicrobial resistance is and how we can control it. And there is a lot to need to be done at a research level. And that's why we have launched our War Cabinet on antimicrobial resistance. And this is the 7 research council coming together to tackle that problem in a multidisciplinary way.
When you say unanswered questions, what exactly do you mean?
There's a lot that we don't know on how the bug, the bacteria, acquire the resistance and how it evolved to become resistant. There's a lot that needed to be known on the target of some new antibiotics. We need to look at new antibiotic development, alternative therapies, maybe looking at a vaccine that could be preventing any infection and that resistant, but as well looking at diagnostics. We actually don't have a very fast way of looking at if someone has an infection, whether it's bacterial or viral, or even if it is a resistant. And of course, we don't understand how transmission goes, whether it's from a human to animal to the environment, and how we can influence this. But even on the top of that, the social aspect of different culture and their acceptance to prescribing antibiotics. So the behavior change of the doctor to prescribe antibiotics when they don't actually know whether you have a bacterial or a viral infection. There are a lot of unanswered questions, and these unanswered questions need to be tackled in a multi-sectorial, multidisciplinary way, and that's what the Medical Research Council is leading on in the UK.
Shelly, you work a lot on tuberculosis. You say that TB is becoming more and more difficult to treat due to the multiple types of drug resistance. Some strains of TB, according to you, are actually untreatable now. So if the drugs are increasingly becoming less and less effective when it comes to the treatment of bacterial infections and they one day run out, what are the alternatives there that could take their place?
See, we are looking at a very difficult problem. We have to see the writing on the wall. Drug-resistant TB is the new plague that can wipe out millions. I'm not being alarmist, I'm speaking the truth. TB has been around for at least 5,000 years. It's as old as the Egyptian mummies, it's as old as the pharaohs. And in the past 2 centuries, 1 billion people have died of tuberculosis. But today, every country that has TB is now reporting drug-resistant TB. We have multi-drug-resistant TB where we have second-line drugs, but we also have extensive drug-resistant TB where we have complicated, difficult drugs that have to be taken for decades. And we have XXDR, or extra extensive drug-resistant TB, where drugs don't act at all and people are doomed to die. Dr. Udwadia in Mumbai reported 12 such cases. So all over the world, we have a huge problem on our hands. And I think we have to do a lot more towards preventing drug resistance. So it's rightly been said that an ounce of prevention is worth pounds and pounds of treatment later on. So the time to act is now to prevent drug-resistant TB, which is what Operation Asha is doing in its community empowerment program using technology for ensuring adherence.
We're going to talk about India in a little more detail in just a second, but first over to Geneva and Dr. Kaiji. Are pharmaceutical research companies able to keep up with the speed of resistance that we're seeing?
Well, I think that one of the issues confronting us is that our current approach to both research and development of new medicines to treat different microorganisms has not really kept pace with the development of resistance. And so I think that, for example, we have not put enough research and development into both the kinds of medicines, the antibiotics, for example, needed to fight these infections. But we also have to be thinking about the other kinds of technologies that are needed. You know, for example, the diagnostic tests that can be used at the bedside of a patient. And the flip side of it, however, is that while we think about making or stimulating the production and the development of these new medicines and diagnostics which are needed, we also have to be thinking about how are we going to use them more effectively? What's the model which is going to keep the private sector and the public sector engaged in making these, but also making sure that they get used in the most rational way. So this is one of the big areas related to antimicrobial resistance, and it's one of the areas which WHO is very actively working with partners on.
Agada, I see you nodding along, but it doesn't seem like there's an economic incentive for big pharmaceutical companies to develop new research, and that seems to be one of the problems.
I mean, I do agree that at the moment, many governments, including the British government, is looking at the different business model to incentivize the industry. But in our view, that we can't only leave it to the industry, and the public-private partnership is crucial to tackle any of the problems. A lot of the blue sky thinking research has emerged from within academia and the research community. But to have industry's input and advice all along is crucial. So what the Medical Research Council has had a long history of working with industry, with pharmaceutical industry and with the technology industry to make sure that the research that we fund will have an impact in a quicker way. What we found historically is research has been funded in isolation, but now it's a new way of bringing these disciplines together and these different sectors together, where whatever is being done at the bench work will really have impact on society, because it will be basically the question that needs to be answered. And I think that's the critical point. It's a shift in the way we are working, whether it's at a research level or at a funded level, like the Medical Research Council.
But the fact is, Rada, the fact is, when only a few thousand or so patients have the drug-resistant bacteria that you want to test your drug against, there's a huge financial disincentive.
It is very true that at this stage, when you look at it, you might find that there is no incentive for industry to invest. But we have not to forget that resistance is cross borders. So with a lot of travel across the world, the fact that we are here in the UK or in Europe and we may think that we have 25,000 deaths a year, could disincentivize the industry. However, A, we don't know the number, and then B, we actually don't know the movement and the transmission that has happened due to movement of people when they go on holiday to any country like India or Africa, or even within European country, where actually resistance is a major problem. We go to hospital, we have a surgery, like having a baby, for example, you might catch an infection and it will be due to a bug that is resistant. That is a problem that at the moment we don't know the real number. I think the problem is larger than what has been reported.
Right.
And the ONU review has told us this.
Okay, well, clearly this is a global problem. Many of the deaths caused by drug-resistant bacteria are in developing countries like India. We were just talking about India a moment ago. Our correspondent Nidhi Dutt has witnessed firsthand how this is playing out at a clinic in New Delhi. Let's take a look.
He's just 14 months old. But for months, Arun Shibbu has been ill. He had typhoid and first saw Dr. Neetu Talwar in January. It took 2 courses of treatment, but now finally he has the all clear.
Since the time we have started our services, almost most of the cases that we have had are drug-resistant cases. Most of them, almost all of them have been multi-drug resistant. So it is a problem.
For adults too, getting the right medical treatment is a growing challenge.
I got medicines from one doctor and then another and then another. When the first treatment didn't work, I went to another for help. But then the second doctor's treatment didn't help either.
It was only when she visited a clinic close to her home that Manorama was found to have drug-resistant tuberculosis. Dr. Shelly Batra has spent the last 20 years treating difficult TB cases and says more and more drugs are becoming ineffective against the disease. She partly blames unqualified health providers.
There are informal providers all around. Some of them are not qualified to write a prescription. So when they write incomplete prescriptions, that is one way patients get drug resistance. So training and upgrading the skills of informal providers is very much required if we want to prevent this disease.
Once a drug-resistant strain of bacteria like typhoid takes hold, it is passed on to others in a community through contaminated water and waste. Sanitation is a daily challenge for people in communities like this, and drug-resistant illnesses are a growing threat. Where the government has failed to fix the problem at its source, health workers have tried to compensate by treating the spread of illnesses with a host of medicines. While ad hoc treatment has done little to contain harmful bacteria, it's raised important questions about the capacity of India's healthcare system to deal with diseases that affect millions of people. They back calls for global action to help stop superbugs and hope it will be enough and won't come too late to protect the health of the next generation. Nidhi Dutt, Al Jazeera, New Delhi.
Dr. Shelley, we saw you in that report by Nidhi Dutt. So if this seems to be a global problem, which it very much is, are the solutions different for various countries?
It is very important to find a solution that can be tweaked and modified according to the countries and geographies we work in, and modified according to social and cultural norms to suit the people. Now, one of the biggest challenges in diseases like tuberculosis is the long duration of treatment. Patients have to take treatment for 6 months. They have to go to a designated TB treatment center, swallow the medicine in the presence of a provider for 6 months. These centers are few and far between, situated miles away. Where is the bus fare coming from? And who is there to support the patient? Where is food for the family coming from? There's so much stigma, so much discrimination. This is why patients stop taking treatment when they start feeling better. And that is how drug resistance sets in. Now the solution would be to take TB treatment or any treatment to the doorsteps of the disadvantaged. Make treatment convenient and accessible so no one has to miss work and wages in order to get the medication. We also have to take care of other issues such as stigma. Someone has to be there to solve the patient's day-to-day problems. Patients are always worried, especially when there are diseases like TB, where there is so much social stigma. My husband will know, my neighbor will know, my boss will know, I lose my job, I won't have food for the family, my landlord will know, I won't have a roof over my heads. So unless we take care of these issues, we cannot ensure adherence.
With all this work that you have done, would you say that you are, not only you, but in fact the global community is far behind when it comes to the race against superbugs?
I think we are losing the battle against superbugs, and we have to clean up our act now.
Okay, let's put that to Dr. Kaiji. Are we losing the battle against superbugs? Would you say that as a member of the WHO?
Well, I would say that we have a pretty tough task ahead of us. I mean, when we look at the scope of the issue, we see something which involves virtually every country in the world. We don't see that there is any country out there which is not seeing the same trend in increasing resistance among a wide variety of pathogens. If we just look at some of the numbers that we know right now, and right now we have minimal information on the numbers, but you know, in Europe we're seeing right now about 25,000 people die each year because of resistant organisms, and about 2.5 million extra hospitalizations. In the U.S., we see about 23,000 deaths per year, and what that's translating into is about $55 billion being spent right now, not in the future, but right now because of this issue. And in Thailand also, we now have data that about 38,000 people per year are dying from resistant organisms. And again, it's, you know, common organisms. It involves ones that we've been hearing about now, such as tuberculosis, HIV, malaria, urinary tract infections, blood infections, some of the most common sexually transmitted diseases like gonorrhea. And so I would say that the problem itself is here now. It is immense. It's going to take us really many years of dealing with this. And
would you describe it as a hidden epidemic?
Well, I would say that this is definitely a global problem. You know, it's in every country.
So does that make it an epidemic?
Well, it makes it really more than an epidemic. In a certain sense, if it covers every country, it's something that we would say is really a global pandemic of resistance. And this is the situation that we are in right now.
Ghada, final thoughts from you. How much of a threat is this to sort of modern medicine? Because it's quite conceivable, is it not, in about a couple of years' time, 10 or 20 years, that treatments like chemotherapy for cancer patients, simple surgery, will become impossible to do because they rely on antibiotics.
That is very correct. And I think what we have done in the last, maybe not to be too negative, in the last couple of years is raise awareness and knowledge of that issue. Because in the last 2, 3, 4 years, on a global level, we're starting, in terms of the public, they're starting to acknowledge that there is a problem. Infection at hospital, it could be a problem, and some countries are able to tackle it better than others. But even the clinician and the engagement with the clinician is much closer between the research community and the clinician. So for me to end on a positive note, we are aware of the problem, and I think this is the first step to tackle it. And from the Medical Research Council perspective, working and funding research cross UK, but cross-sectorial and even cross different countries, I think it's crucial to help tackle that problem, but not one organization can do it on its own.
Is there enough, Ghada, of a public outcry when it comes to this issue?
It really country dependent, and there have been a lot of surveys that have been done, and the general public is probably unaware of this situation, and that's why if raising the awareness not only within the public but even within the clinician, the practitioner, the vet who's giving antibiotics to the sheep, for example, and the cattle as a preventative measure, I think it's crucial for everybody to get educated of what is exactly the resistant and how best to tackle it. There is a lot of best practice that could be followed, and as well the public understanding that if the doctor doesn't give antibiotics straight away, that is really to the benefit of the patient. So it's a communal, it's a social issue, not only in India as we've just heard, but even within the UK and a European level. There is a need to be raise awareness and better education.
Okay. On that note, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us, KG Fukuda over in Geneva, Shelley Batra in New Delhi, and Rada Zobiana in London. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story, and thank you for watching. As always, we do welcome your thoughts. You can get in touch through our program page on aljazeera.com. You can post your comments there on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also tweet us using @AJ Inside Story. From myself, the whole team here in Doha, goodbye for now.